Up next in the broadcast, wrapping up her series of multilateral summits overseas, President Park Geun-hye returns with a couple of free trade agreements under her belt, which now need passage by the National Assembly. Despite years of Abe-nomics stimulus policies, Japan unexpectedly slips into a recession. The Nikkei 225 index closes down 3%, and the yen hits a 7-year low against the dollar. An American aid worker becomes the latest victim of beheading in a video released by the Islamic State. U.S. President Barack Obama confirms the footage as authentic and calls the act pure evil. Primetime News begins now.
Welcome to the program. You're watching Primetime News, coming to you live from Seoul. I am Kang Tae-ri.
And I'm Sean Lim. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. It's the start of the new weekend for President Park, who is now back on Korean soil after attending this year's APEC summit and G20 meeting. There's much to follow up on.
Exactly. During her 9-day trip, the president finalized 2 free trade negotiations. Arirang's presidential office correspondent Choi San has more on the results of President Park's recent diplomatic moves.
Following a 2.5-year tug-of-war, President Park Geun-hye meeting her Chinese counterpart on the sidelines of the APEC Beijing summit announced the conclusion of Korea-China FTA negotiations.
글로벌 경기 회복이 지연되고 저성장 국면이 지속되고 있는 세계 경제에도 반가운 소식이 될 것이라고 생각합니다.
By finalizing a free trade deal with its biggest trading partner, Korea hopes to reduce $5.4 billion in annual tariffs and to accelerate entry into China's consumer goods and domestic markets. Another long-awaited deal, Korea's FTA with New Zealand, was finalized and announced by the two countries' leaders on the sidelines of the G20 Brisbane summit. Korea has secured a greater voice in multilateral trade talks, having concluded FTAs with 10 out of the 12 countries participating in the U.S.-led free trade network, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and 16 of 21 Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation members. On the diplomatic front, President Park maintained a balance in relations with Korea's key partnering nations, talking about ways to boost cooperation on the North Korean nuclear issue with both of the G2 leaders. She also sought ways to thaw relations with Tokyo, agreeing with her Japanese counterpart to move forward on talks over resolving Japan's wartime sex slavery of Korean women and expressing hopes for a trilateral leaders summit with China and Japan.
영내의 평화와 번영에 기여하는 길은 바로 이와 같은 실질적 협력을 강화하는 것이라고 생각합니다.
And lastly, at the G20 summit, the Korean leaders' growth strategy by way of social reforms, deregulation, and support for the creative industries received the highest grade among the G20 nations. Choi Yu-sun, Arirang News.
And just to add to our Yusun's report on the president's flight back home, she spent some time with the presidential press corps, about half an hour or so, relatively speaking, longer than usual. And she said when it comes to the prospects of the three-way summit with China and Japan, uncertainties do remain, and that the foreign ministers' prep meeting needs to be watched.
Right, and also what needs to be observed is how Korea's National Assembly comes out to be either supportive or non-supportive of the free trade agreements she was able to sign with China and New Zealand. And so, of course, those need to be passed through the National Assembly, so it's not over yet.
And she also talked about her comments at the G20 summit. It was an interesting comment. Relatively speaking, stronger than usual, largely seemed to criticize the weak yen policy of Japan, right?
Right, and she said that these monetary policies in advanced countries have heightened the fluctuations in the the markets and have had negative spillover effects in emerging countries.
And she actually explained these comments, saying she believed that things should not be left as is. So that's the reason why I said it. And I think it would be worth it to watch how Korea's financial authorities, if they react or follow up on this, and if they do, and how that reaction is going to come out. And here's a story that clearly shows how the weak yen story is having an impact on the trade front. The proportion of South Korea's exports to Japan has dropped to a record low this year.
Right, and most of the blame falls on the weakening Japanese yen. Our Park Geun-hye tells us why.
The tumbling Japanese yen is weighing on Korean exporters trying to sell their products to the country. Data from Statistics Korea shows exports to Japan in the January to September period this year stood at roughly $24.5 billion, accounting for 5.7% of all Korean exports. That ratio is the lowest recorded since the agency started to compile such data in 1966. During the same period, exports to China took up around 25%, while the United States made up 12%. And Korean exports to Japan has been on a downward spiral for the past 3 years. Watchers attribute the drop to Korea's move to diversify its export markets and to the falling yen, which was triggered by the Japanese government's aggressive stimulus measures. The yen has lost a third of its value against the greenback since the end of 2012. The weak yen trend strengthens the price competitiveness of Japanese exporters and normally raises Korea's imports from Japan, but that has not happened yet. Experts say that's because of Japanese exporters that are not actively cutting their prices on the back of the weak yen and Korea's sluggish domestic demand that is slowing Korea's overall imports. Park Geun-hye, Arirang News.
Instead of expanding in the third quarter of this year, as many had expected, Japan's economy went the other direction and is now technically in recession. The surprising figures are likely to force the Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe to call a snap election as early as next month and delay a hike in sales tax in the country. Song Ji-sun tells us more.
Japan slipped into an unexpected recession in the third quarter after logging negative growth for the second consecutive quarter. The world's third largest economy marked negative 1.6% growth for the July to September period, far below the market expectation of a 2.1% bump. In macroeconomics, 2 or more consecutive quarters of economic contraction typically signals recession. While exports and consumer spending returned to gains last quarter, they weren't strong enough to offset the impact of a slump in stocks of unsold goods, which means companies can't move forward with additional production. This follows an over 7% yearly drop in the second quarter, recorded right after Tokyo hiked its sales tax from 5% to 8% in April. That was the biggest fall since Japan's deadly earthquake and tsunami in March 2011. Monday's figures pushed the benchmark Nikkei down nearly 3% to just below 17,000, with the Japanese yen exchanging at a 7-year low at lower than 117 yen against the greenback during trading. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe is widely expected to call a snap election as early as mid-December, in hopes of delaying an increase in the sales tax to 10% next year. The hike was legislated by the previous administration to curb Japan's huge public debt. Japanese lawmakers say postponing the planned increase by a year and a half could add about 0.5% to growth. Song Ji-sun, Arirang News.
Last Friday, investors went wild over the highly anticipated IPO for Samsung SDS, and we just closed another trading day today, and the stock seems to be keeping up with its momentum.
But for more on why this is not just an ordinary IPO and why it plays a pivotal role in the power shift at the nation's largest conglomerate, we bring in E.G. Soo, lawyer at the Center for Good Corporate Governance. Thanks so much for joining us today. So the stock closed up as well today, over 3% at about $300 a share. The IPO started at under $200. Is this stock valued based on sound economic fundamentals?
Well, I think the market is picking up the factors that even after Samsung SDS is being offered to the public, almost 40% of its stakes are still possessed by its subsidiaries, 40%. So which means they will have business ties with other subsidiaries. So considering that, their future is quite bright and their intrinsic value is okay. So the current price, I wouldn't say is overpriced at all.
And we're reading into this speculation brewing there. So let's talk about this Samsung SDS's function in terms of, in generational power transfer from Chairman Lee Geun-hye. Right. How much of this is speculation?
From J.Y. Lee's, Lee Jae-yong's perspective, he needs some money in order to pay, inheritance tax to the government. But there's no way he can sell part of shares of Samsung Life Insurance because that will shake the entire, corporate power of the group. Right. So with the money that he can get by selling his SDS stakes to the market down the road, not immediately, he will be able to prepare cash to pay, inheritance tax to the government and have that 20.76% intact.
So what's important for us to note is that to maintain control of the group, you have to maintain control over Samsung Life Insurance. Like that portion of this entire cross-shareholding structure is pivotal for
two most important entities in order to hold the corporate power of the entire group is JAIL Industries and Samsung Life Insurance. Those two must be controlled by the controlling family in order to control the entire group.
Let's talk about how Lee Jae-yong, the vice chairman of Samsung Electronics and the heir apparent, did acquire these shares of Samsung SDS many, many years ago at almost $1 a share. Right. How did that happen? And is this a 100% legal mechanism or a 100% ethical mechanism?
Right. Well, although they could not predict the exact moment when this must take place, they were getting prepared for almost 10 years ago or 20 years ago. The time will come when the group control must be transferred from one generation to the next. So they prepared this for many, many years. As we all know very well, in 1999, Samsung SDS decided to issue what's called BWs, bonds with warranties, at a very discounted price, well below the market price. And it's been challenged by many shareholders and many stakeholders. And later, in year 2009, after the special prosecutors was done, key parties of Samsung Group was found guilty that they have violated some law, some existing laws, and that's the case how J.Y. Lee, Lee Jae-yong got possession of Samsung SDS. It turned out that now it's going IPO. He was able to realize lots of profit, almost 280% folds what he spent to buy that stake. And now he's becoming one of the richest men in this country.
How does this case strengthen Samsung's future prospects? I mean, maybe the real question here is, what's your take on this very complicated web of circular cross-shareholding?
First of all, by having SDS go public, they will at least be able to manage the immediate problem. It was always a big headache for Samsung controlling family because where can Lee Jae-yong, have accumulate enough cash to pay inheritance tax? That was probably the most crucial question that they have to resolve. The next problem that they have to deal with is how will they, first of all, deal with this circular ownership structure that's been attacked. The next, the group will probably go through multiple transactions and have so-called holding company structure but it will take time, and it also will incur a lot of transaction costs.
But then there's another portion of this story that seems to be part two. In December, Jail Industries, the holding company above Samsung Life Insurance, is going to go public. How does that play into this big picture?
Right. As I said before, Samsung Group, as of today, has many circular ownership structure. It's been highly criticized from the market, saying, that should not be the case. So once Samsung Everland goes public, they will get some capital outside that can enable some of the entities to be restructured into a holding company structure.
And presumably that'll increase transparency and create a global company that more investors around the world can trust. So thank you so much for your insight and sharing your time with us tonight.
Thank you very much.
Smart homes are one of the most promising areas in the Internet of Things, in which everything we touch and interact with is connected to the World Wide Web. At first, companies were quick to hook up home appliances to the net, but now they're exploring products that are not traditionally electronic, like furniture. Here is our Kim Ji-yeon with this week's Industry Insight.
This user looks up a recipe in front of her kitchen shelf and then checks the prices of the produce and ingredients she needs before placing a delivery order. She also calls her friend to confirm a dinner appointment while uploading a message on the family board to remind them they'll be having guests. This kitchen shelf is an example of smart furniture, and it's not science fiction. It will be a reality in Korea early next year. Korea's largest telecommunications operator, SK Telecom, has partnered up with the country's #2 furniture maker, Hyundai to produce smart furniture. Available on both the iOS and Android operating systems, the devices will allow users to enjoy multimedia content from applications downloaded on a wireless network. SK Telecom says it's the first company in the world to create smart furniture, and the development is in line with its goal of providing better smart home services.
We thought that connecting the furniture most commonly used by homemakers would be a great way to expand the market of the Internet of Things, because they're mainly going to be the ones using smart home services.
SK Telecom says it wants to bring a lifestyle change by adding more functions to its devices, as well as developing other kinds of furniture, including smart beds and sofas for its customers.
This is one of my personal favorites, the dressing table. It's very convenient for workers like me who have to get up and rush to the office every morning. I can quickly check the latest news and my schedule while I do my hair and makeup. And there's sensors embedded in the mirrors, which are touchscreen. So it's also Bluetooth enabled, so I can receive and make calls or listen to my music using my smartphone.
And if things pan out as SK plans, this mirror will soon allow users pick their clothes through avatars that try out various outfits in different colors on the screen. SK Telecom and Hyundai say they hope to sell $45 million worth of smart furniture by the year 2017. And the climate for business looks bright due to the rising demand for smart home devices. Data by US-based market tracker Strategy Analytics shows that the global market for smart homes will grow to more than $100 billion in 2019, more than double this year's total of $45 billion. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
Special North Korean envoy for leader Kim Jong-un left Pyongyang on Monday for an 8-day trip to Russia. Tae Yong-hae, one of Kim's closest aides, will visit Moscow as well as Vladivostok in Russia's Far East to discuss economic and political ties. Speculation is also rife that he will meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin to deliver a personal letter from the young North Korean leader. Photos released by the Associated Press show Che being accompanied by the Vice Foreign Minister and Chief Nuclear Negotiator Kim Gae-kwan, suggesting North Korea's nuclear program may be a topic of conversation during the trip. Meanwhile, James Clapper, America's top intelligence official who recently visited North Korea, has talked about his trip to U.S. media outlets. Most notably, he says Pyongyang was seeking a breakthrough with Washington. Our Kwon So-hwa has more.
U.S. Director of National Intelligence James Clapper's trip to North Korea was a success in that he freed 2 American detainees there and crossed visiting the communist state off his professional bucket list. But the trip was apparently not as satisfying on North Korea's end. Clapper told CBS News in an interview over the weekend that North Korea seemed to be disappointed with the trip as there was no diplomatic breakthrough as a result. Clapper says the short letter he carried with him from President Barack Obama mostly stated that it would be received as a positive gesture to free American detainees Kenneth Bae and Matthew Miller. Clapper said the tone of the dinner he had with officials was pretty terse and that this atmosphere kept him apprehensive on whether he would be allowed to bring the captives back to the States. During talks on human rights, officials told him they don't want Washington kicking up a fuss about the issue. Clapper said officials in Pyongyang criticized the U.S. for attempting to intervene in their internal matters. He added that he got the impression the North felt it was under siege. The intelligence chief, however, also encountered a different tone on the sidelines when an official who appeared to be in his 40s expressed interest in Clapper visiting again in the future. Clapper said this seemed to embody the generational divide between the younger and older officials in the North Korean regime. Kwon So-hwa, Arirang News.
Islamic State militants have released another video showing the decapitation of American aid worker Peter Kasich.
To tell us more, we turn to Paul Yee at the News Center. Paul, it looks like the international community has been swift in condemning this brutal killing.
That's right. EU leaders and French President Francois Hollande have called it a crime against humanity, while U.S. President Obama condemned the execution as an act of pure evil. Kasich was a former U.S. soldier who returned to Syria to help refugees through his aid group, Sarah. He was then captured by militants last October. Obama honored the Muslim convert as a humanitarian who worked to save lives. The latest 15-minute clip also showed the mass beheading of 18 Syrian troops. And shifting back to the Asia-Pacific, China and Australia have struck a landmark free trade agreement following a summit between the country's top leaders. Chinese President Xi Jinping and Australian Prime Minister Tony Abbott signed the deal on Monday during a ceremony in Canberra. The FTA is expected to open up China's agricultural markets worth billions of U.S. dollars, while Chinese investors gain greater access to Australia's natural resources. And finally, the iconic hat worn by French Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte has been sold at auction for $2.4 million U.S. dollars. According to AFP, Lee Tae-gyun, the head of food industry giant Halim, made the winning bid Sunday near Paris. He plans to display the black felted topper at the company's new building to show his employees that they, like Napoleon, are pioneers in their own right. And that wraps up our look at international stories for now. I'll see you back here tomorrow night.
Hello and welcome. I'm Stephen Che with a look at sports. In the latest spate of international football matches comes to an end on Tuesday, and South Korea is set to go up against rival Iran in its final friendly fixture of the year. The Taeguk Warriors outdueled Jordan 1-0 on Friday and are looking to sweep through its Middle East trip with a road win against Iran. However, history isn't on their side. Iran has never lost to South Korea at home, handing the rivals 3 losses and 2 draws. But more than anything, it's manager Uli Stilika's final chance to see his players in action before announcing the final roster for the Asian Cup in January. Kickoff is at 4:25 p.m. local time or 9:55 p.m. here in Korea on Tuesday. And moving on to the live games of the night, first to the KBL, the struggling KCC Aegis hosted the red-hot Mobis Phoebus in Jeonju. And the visitors bring the heat early on thanks to Ricardo Ratliff taking a 16-point cushion into the half. Yang Dong-gun gets it done on both ends of the court as Mobis win their 11th straight game. And heading to the V-League, first up, it's the ladies of the Korea Expressway Zenith taking on the GS Caltex Kicks. And the visiting Kicks get off to a good start before they run out of gas. The Zenith, led by Nicole Fawcett, unleash the attack and win in 4 sets. And for the men, the Uricard Hanse gets stung by the OK Savings Bank Russian Cash, who rise to the top of the standings with the resounding straight sets win. The Hanse, meanwhile, are in last place. Now to golf, Korean-American Christina Kim took home the trophy at the Lorena Ochoa Invitational for her first LPGA win in 9 years. China's Shan Shan Feng made a run as Kim gave up a 5-shot lead in the final round, with both ending at 15 under. But Kim held on to par the second playoff hole for what she called the greatest win of her career. And that wraps it up for sports. Stay tuned for your weather up next. Have a great evening.
Hello everyone, I'm Kim Bo-kyung with the latest weather forecast. At the moment, light rain is falling over both Jeollado provinces, which should continue through later tonight. Also, conditions remain dry along the eastern coast of Gangwon province as well as both Gyeongsang-do provinces, where humidity is down at about 40%, so stay hydrated. As for tomorrow, another brisk autumn day is in store, but be prepared for a big gap in temperatures between the day and night. Morning lows will dip below the seasonal average before climbing up to the low to mid-teens in the afternoon. Looking ahead, expect similar weather throughout the week before nationwide showers fall on Friday. On to Tuesday's readings. Seoul hits 11, while Daegu and Gwangju reach 13. On to other regions. Jeju makes it to 14, Dokdo hits 10, while Kumgang drops to 1. Those are the updates I have for you now. I'll be back with more after midnight.
And that's primetime news for this Monday. Thanks for watching. I'm Sean Lim.
And I'm Kang Cheri. Have a great evening, everyone. We'll see you again soon.